Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive. And today we're taking on a topic that's near and dear to my heart. We're going beyond the swings and slides, and we're really going to explore this fascinating world of playground design.
Oh, cool.
Our source material today is a research article, and it really dives deep into how the layout of a playground can influence children's social interactions.
Interesting.
This particular study we're looking at took place in Dian Forest Park in Taipei
Okay.
and focused on children between the ages of 3 and 6.
Yeah.
And trust me, the findings are surprisingly insightful, even if you don't have kids or design playgrounds for a living.
Well, what's really intriguing here is that the study goes beyond just, that simple question of, do kids have fun on playgrounds? It digs deeper into the types of interactions that are happening and how design choices can really nudge those interactions in different directions.
Okay, so how did the researchers actually study this? Did they interview the kids or?
They used a method called non-participant observation. Essentially, they became flies on the wall,
Okay.
carefully observing and recording children's behavior without, directly interacting with them.
Right.
And this approach allows researchers to capture those natural, unprompted play patterns,
Yeah.
which can be really revealing.
That makes sense. Yeah, like getting a glimpse into their world without influencing it.
Exactly.
So what did they find? Were kids building friendships left and right amidst the jungle gyms?
Well, that's where things get interesting.
Okay.
The researchers found that, contrary to what we might expect, children actually spent the majority of their time in solo play.
Oh,
Peer interaction was the least frequent type of behavior observed.
wait, really? You'd think playgrounds would be designed to spark interaction.
You would think.
What were the kids doing instead of, playing together?
The study highlights some interesting details.
Okay.
For instance, they found that even in areas that are designed for pausing or passing through, like aisles and rest areas, children tended to move quickly, focusing more on the equipment itself rather than lingering for potential interaction.
So even with the right equipment, the social aspect wasn't really clicking.
Yeah, it's kind of surprising.
It's surprising.
And it leads to an important question. Are traditional playground designs missing the mark when it comes to encouraging the social development that we often associate with play?
So what did the researchers do to address this lack of interaction?
Intrigued by this observation, they decided to introduce a new element to the playground,
Okay.
something seemingly simple,
Yeah.
a bubble machine.
Okay.
And they strategically placed it in a previously underutilized area of the playground, and this seemingly small change had a significant impact on how the children interacted.
A bubble machine. That sounds pretty lit tech for such a dramatic shift.
Right.
Was it just the novelty of bubbles, or was there something more to it?
It wasn't just about the bubbles themselves, although those were definitely a draw, especially for the younger kids. What's fascinating is how the researchers intentionally designed the bubble machine and its surrounding space
Hmm.
to encourage more collaborative types of play.
Okay, I'm hooked.
Good.
Tell me more about these design choices.
Yeah.
What made this particular bubble machine so special?
First, they made it a bit tricky to operate.
Okay.
The mechanism wasn't immediately obvious,
Right.
requiring children to work together to figure out how to make the bubbles flow.
So,
This built-in challenge encouraged problem-solving and communication right from the start.
So a little bit of frustration can actually be a good thing when it comes to sparking collaboration.
Exactly.
I-
Then to further encourage interaction, they made the walls of the bubble machine area transparent.
Okay.
This allowed children to easily observe and imitate each other, which, as you know, is crucial for learning and social development,
Yeah.
especially at these ages.
So they could watch how other kids were tackling the bubble making challenge and pick up on those social cues.
Right. Exactly.
That makes a lot of sense.
And finally, the bubble machine area had a sense of enclosure, creating a distinct social space within the larger playground.
Okay.
This subtle design choice fostered a feeling of shared experience and encouraged kids to linger and interact within that dedicated bubble zone.
That's like they created their own little bubble world.
Yeah,
Literally.
right.
So we've got a cleverly designed bubble machine in a previously underutilized spot. What happened when the kids encountered it? Did it actually work?
It did work. It did. The results were quite remarkable, actually. The
Yeah.
researchers observed noticeable changes in how different age groups interacted, both with the bubble machine itself and with each other.
Okay, let's break that down a bit. What happened with the youngest kids, the ones under 3 years old?
Yeah, for that age group, solo play decreased by half.
Wow.
And what replaced that time? You guessed it, increased interaction with their peers.
Oh, wow.
They were observing each other, trying to figure out this intriguing contraption together.
That's a huge shift for such young kids.
Yeah.
What about the slightly older children, those between 3 and 6?
In that age group, the researchers saw a significant increase in more advanced interactions. We're talking about increased talking physical contact and even what researchers call level 5 interaction, which is essentially collaborative play.
Collaborative play that sounds much more involved than just, chasing bubbles. What does that look like in action?
Think of it as coordinated play where the kids have a shared goal. They might take turns operating the machine chase bubbles together or even come up with their own games involving the bubbles. The key is that they're interacting in a more complex and coordinated way than before.
So it wasn't just about, having fun with bubbles, but actually fostering these social skills and collaborative behaviors.
Fascinating.
But what about the oldest kids in this study, the ones over 6? Did they find the bubble machine as engaging?
Interestingly, the older children were more likely to use the bubble machine alone or even exclude others from participating.
Oh,
This highlights the importance of age-appropriate design. What works for one age group might not be as stimulating or challenging for another.
that makes sense. They might need a more elaborate bubble machine to, pique their interest or spark that collaboration.
Exactly. The key takeaway here is that designers, whether they're designing playgrounds, classrooms, or even online spaces, need to carefully consider the developmental needs and interests of the specific age group they're targeting.
So it's not just about adding a fun element, but about thoughtful design that encourages specific types of interaction for different ages. But stepping back for a moment, why should we care about playground design if we don't have kids or work in design? What's the broader relevance here?
This study has some really interesting implications for anyone who cares about creating spaces that foster positive social dynamics. What's fascinating is that it suggests spatial design can have a powerful influence on human behavior in any environment, not just playgrounds. Think about offices, schools, even your own home.
Oh, that's true. I'm already thinking about my own workspace. Maybe a few tweaks could encourage more spontaneous conversations or collaboration. But before we get ahead of ourselves, can we unpack why this seemingly simple bubble machine intervention was so successful?
One key factor is the role of observation and imitation in learning and development. Remember how the researchers made the walls of the bubble machine transparent? This allowed the kids to see each other, study their actions, and learn from their peers.
It's like they were subconsciously picking up social cues and behaviors from each other, all thanks to a well-placed bubble machine.
That's a great way to put it. It highlights how we can create environments that naturally nudge people towards social learning and exploration, even without explicit instructions or guidance.
It's amazing how a small design tweak can have such a ripple effect. So we've talked about observation, age-appropriate design. What are some other key takeaways for those of us listening who aren't designers? How can we apply this to our own lives?
This study reminds us of the power we all have to be social architects in our own ways. We can observe the spaces we inhabit, both physical and virtual, and ask ourselves, how do these spaces encourage or discourage interaction?
So taking a moment to look around and think about how the design of a space impacts the people in it. That's a great starting point. But where do we go from there?
Once you've observed, then it's time to experiment. What simple changes could you make to promote more connection and collaboration? Could you rearrange furniture, add plants, or create a dedicated space for conversation? Even small changes can have a surprising impact.
I love that observation and experimentation. And, I'm reminded of another interesting detail from the study, how they observed differences in caregiver behavior depending on the playground environment.
Yes, they found that caregiver behavior was subtly influenced by the design of the playground. For example, caregivers were more likely to intervene and assist children when the equipment was more challenging to operate.
It's fascinating how design can influence not just the kids' interactions, but also the dynamics between caregivers and children. Like you said, design impacts all of us, regardless of age. But is there anything else we should keep in mind when thinking about designing for different age groups, besides just making it age appropriate?
One point the study emphasizes is that children and really people in general thrive when they have a mix of structured and unstructured play. It's not just about letting kids run wild all the time or conversely having every activity meticulously planned.
So striking a balance between free play and guided activity is key.
Exactly. A well-designed space, whether it's a playground or a living room, should offer a range of options to support both spontaneous exploration and more structured types of play.
This has been such a thought-provoking conversation. I feel like I have a whole new lens for looking at the spaces around me and how they impact our interactions.
I'm glad to hear it. And I'm
Yeah.
sure our listeners are feeling inspired to apply these insights to their own lives.
Before we wrap up, I want to make sure we've equipped our listeners with some practical takeaways. What are some concrete steps they can take to become more mindful social architects?
Here's where we can get really actionable. First and foremost, remember to observe your surroundings. Pay attention to how people interact in different spaces. What design elements seem to encourage or discourage connection?
And once they've observed, encourage them to experiment.
Absolutely. Try rearranging furniture, adding some greenery, or creating a designated area for conversation. You might be surprised by the positive changes that result from even small tweaks. And remember, don't be afraid to think outside the box.
Right. The bubble machine itself was a simple, unexpected addition that transformed a neglected space. What are some other creative outside-the-box ideas that could spark interaction?
Think about incorporating elements of surprise delight or even a little whimsy into your spaces. What could you add that would spark curiosity or encourage people to linger and connect?
So it's about observation, experimentation, and a dash of creativity. This is all starting to click. Are there any final words of wisdom before we move on to the final takeaway of this deep dive?
Yeah, and don't forget the importance of age-appropriate design and that balance between structured and unstructured activities. But most importantly, remember that we all have the power to shape the social dynamics of our spaces.
It's like we're all carrying around our own invisible bubble machines just waiting to be activated. This has been an incredible deep dive and, feels like we've only just, scratched the surface of this fascinating topic.
Indeed, there's always more to explore when it comes to the interplay between design and human behavior.
But before we send our listeners off to redesign the world, I want to leave them with a final thought-provoking idea, something to ponder as they go about their day. Throughout this episode, we've been talking about the power of design to shape social interaction. But what if we take that concept a step further? What if we start thinking of ourselves not just as designers of spaces, but as designers of interactions themselves?
Ooh, that's an intriguing proposition. What exactly do you mean?
We often think of social interactions as these, spontaneous things that just happen organically. But what if we were more deliberate, more intentional about the interactions we create? What if we applied the same design principles we've been discussing to the way we communicate, build relationships, and engage with our communities?
I see where you're going with this. It's about being more mindful of the social dynamics we're creating, even in our everyday interactions. Not just letting things unfold haphazardly, but making conscious choices that shape the tone and direction of our interactions.
Exactly. Think back to that bubble machine. It didn't just magically create interaction. It was designed with specific features that encouraged collaboration, observation, and play. What if we took those same principles and applied them to our communication styles, to the way we approach conversations and relationships?
So instead of just throwing out, random conversation bubbles, we think about how we can design our interactions to be more engaging, more inclusive, and more likely to spark genuine connection.
Precisely. What if we were more intentional about creating those transparent walls in our communication, being more open and receptive to different perspectives? Or how about designing those enclosed spaces for meaningful conversations, creating opportunities for deeper connection and understanding?
It's a fascinating challenge and invites us to take ownership of the social dynamics we create, not just in design spaces, but in all aspects of our lives. It's about recognizing that we have more agency than we might realize when it comes to shaping the quality of our interactions.
It's empowering, isn't it?
Yeah,
To realize that we're not just passive participants in social dynamics, but active interaction designers
yeah,
with the ability to influence the tone and direction of our connections.
absolutely. It's a shift in perspective that can open up a world of possibilities for creating more positive and fulfilling social experiences.
So as you go about your day, we challenge you to think about how you can be a more intentional interaction designer.
Hmm.
How can you design conversations that spark connection? How can you build relationships that are based on collaboration and understanding? How can you create communities that are inclusive and engaging?
It's a powerful invitation, and one that has the potential to transform not just our individual experiences, but the very fabric of our social world.
On that inspiring note, we'll wrap up this deep dive. We hope you've enjoyed exploring the surprising connections between playground design, social interaction, and the power of intentional design.
It's been a pleasure diving deep with you as always.
Until next time, keep those bubble machines bubbling, both literally and metaphorically. And keep designing interactions that spark joy, connection, and a sense of wonder in the world.